You'll get what's left. That was what my older brother told me after I asked why our parents' trust distributions had dropped from 5 figures to almost nothing. He said it on speakerphone, while our younger sister cried in the background and I sat at my kitchen table staring at a spreadsheet that made no sense. 9 months later, he was sitting in a courtroom while a judge read the list of checks he had written to himself, the loans he had made to his failing business, and the trustee fees he had padded like an invoice from a stranger. By the end of that hearing, he had lost control of the trust, owed the money back with interest, and finally understood what our father meant when he told us, years earlier, that family money could make honest people careful and dishonest people confident. To understand how my brother ended up hearing his own arrogance answered in court, I have to go back to the first distribution that vanished. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from while you listen. A quick note. Some details have been changed for storytelling and privacy, but the emotions at the heart of this are real. Now let me take you back to the kitchen table, the spreadsheet, and the phone call, where my brother made the mistake of saying out loud what he had been doing quietly for months. My name is Marcus, and for most of my adult life, I would have told you my family was normal in the boring way. Not perfect, not movie close, just normal. We had Thanksgiving arguments about football. We had group texts that went quiet for weeks, and then exploded with 40 messages about who was bringing potato salad. We had old resentments that everyone knew were there, but nobody touched unless somebody had too much wine. My parents, Daniel and Ruth, had 4 kids. My older brother David was first, then me, then my sister Lena. Then our youngest brother, Jonah, who still got called the baby even after he had a mortgage and a daughter in kindergarten. My father ran a small commercial plumbing company for 38 years. He was not rich in the way people imagine rich. He drove the same white pickup until the driver's seat had a permanent dip where his wallet sat. He kept receipts in envelopes. He thought paying full price for cable was a moral failure. But he owned the little warehouse his company used. He bought a few rental duplexes over the years, and he and my mother lived like every dollar was going to be cross-examined later. By the time they were in their 70s, they had built something solid. Not flashy, solid. My mother was the one who pushed for the trust. She had watched 2 cousins fight over their aunt's house for almost a decade, and she said she would haunt us if we made strangers in suits richer than her own grandchildren. So when my parents were both still sharp, they went to an estate attorney named Mr. Hargrove and put the business property, the rentals, some investment accounts, and a life insurance policy into the Daniel and Ruth Ellis Family Trust. They named David and me as successor co-trustees after both of them were gone. They named all 4 kids as equal beneficiaries. At the signing meeting, my mother wore her blue church sweater and kept asking if the trust meant we would still have to clean out the garage. Mr. Hargrove laughed and said, "The trust cannot save your children from the garage." My father did not laugh much. He sat with one hand on the folder and one hand wrapped around the paper coffee cup the receptionist had given him. Near the end, after we had signed witness forms and listened to words like fiduciary and accounting and principal, he looked at David and me and said, "This is not a prize for being in charge. This is a job. You two understand that?" I said yes. David said, "Of course, Dad. Relax." That was David in 3 words. Of course. Relax. He had a way of making responsibility sound like something other people were dramatic about. He was 5 years older than me and had always carried himself like he was the family advance team. He did things first and then expected applause for discovering them. First kid to drive, first to move out, first to start a business, first to tell the rest of us we did not understand how the real world worked. His business was called Ellis Facilities Group, which sounded larger than it was. It did maintenance contracts for small office parks, strip malls, and medical buildings. Some years it did fine. Some years David spent Christmas talking too loudly about accounts receivable, which was how we knew it was not doing fine. He had a talent for sounding successful while quietly borrowing against tomorrow. My father helped him more than once. A bridge loan here, a truck co-signed there. A vendor introduced with a handshake and a warning to David not to embarrass the family name. I went a different direction. I became a project manager for a regional insurance company. My job was not exciting. I lived in spreadsheets, deadlines, compliance memos, and conference calls, where people said, "Circle back," like it was a prayer. But that job did teach me one thing that would matter later. If money moved, there was supposed to be a record. If somebody had authority, there was supposed to be a reason. And if the numbers changed, the explanation had to be clearer than the change. My wife Erin used to tease me because I balanced our household budget on Sunday nights with a cup of tea and a green pen. She said no one under 80 used a check register anymore. I told her I was preserving a craft. The truth was simpler. I had 2 kids, a mortgage, and the kind of childhood that taught me money could be quiet until it was suddenly very loud. My parents never fought about much in front of us, but when they fought about money, the whole house held its breath. When my mother got sick, the trust stopped being a folder in a lawyer's office and became part of our daily life. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3 by the time they found it. My father tried to act like appointments were errands. My mother did not let him. She kept a notebook in her purse with medication times, doctor names, and little reminders for us. "Marcus likes the black-handled scissors," she wrote once, because she had borrowed them and wanted me to know they were in the laundry room. That was my mother. Dying, and still worried somebody would look for scissors. She passed first. My father lasted 14 months after her. I think people expected him to fight harder, but he had fought alongside her for 2 years and did not know what to do with the silence after. He died on a gray morning in March, sitting in his recliner with the TV on mute and an old plumbing catalog on his lap. David found him. That detail mattered to him later. He said it like ownership. "I was the one who found Dad." As if grief came with a management title. The first few months after my father's funeral were a blur of death certificates, insurance forms, keys, utility bills, and people saying they were sorry in grocery store aisles. I did not want to be a co-trustee. I did not want to be anything except my mother's son and my father's son, which was no longer a position anybody could see. But paperwork does not care if you are grieving. Rent checks still came in. Property taxes still had due dates. The investment account needed updated authority. The plumbing warehouse had a tenant whose lease had been month to month for 16 years because my father trusted a handshake more than a calendar reminder. At first, David was useful. I will give him that. He knew where a lot of things were. He had my father's old banker on speed dial. He knew which duplex had the water heater that made a clicking sound before it died. He had the confidence to walk into offices and say, "I'm the trustee." And people handed him forms. When I suggested that we slow down and meet with Mr. Hargrove before moving anything, David waved me off. "We don't need to pay a lawyer $300 an hour to tell us Dad owned a warehouse," he said. "We need to know what we're required to do," I said. "We're required not to be idiots. I can handle bills. You handle your spreadsheets. We'll be fine." It sounded rude, but in those days I still translated David's rudeness into stress. That was a family habit. David did something sharp, and the rest of us sanded it down in our heads. He is under pressure. He means well. He is just direct. He is the oldest. He is used to carrying things. My mother had done it for him. My father had done it with clenched teeth. After they were gone, I realized we had inherited that job too. The trust terms were not complicated. at least not on the surface. Keep enough reserve to manage the properties, pay taxes and legitimate expenses, distribute income equally to the 4 beneficiaries twice a year, and eventually decide whether to sell the assets or keep them under neutral management. The rental income alone was enough to produce steady distributions. Not life-changing money, but useful money. The kind that lets you pay down a credit card, fix a roof, fund a college account, or sleep better for a few months. The first distribution after Dad died came in September. Mine was $18,750. Lena's was the same. Jonah's was the same. David's, I assumed, was the same, though he never said. The memo line on the check read, "Trust distribution, first admin period." I remember holding it at my kitchen counter and feeling strange, grateful and guilty at the same time. My kids were doing homework at the table. Aaron touched my arm and said, "Your parents would want it to help." So we used part of it to pay down our van loan and put the rest into college savings. David sent a group text that day. "First distribution done. Future ones may vary due to admin expenses. Don't spend it all in one place." Lena replied with a heart. Jonah replied, "Thanks, man." I replied, "Can you send the backup when you have a chance? Rental income, expenses, reserve calculation, nothing urgent." David did not answer for 4 hours. Then he wrote, "It's all in the books." That was the first tiny stone in my shoe. The second distribution came the next March. $11,200. Still helpful, but noticeably lower. I called David after work, sitting in my car outside my son's basketball practice because I did not want to have the conversation in front of Aaron until I knew what I was talking about. "Hey," I said. "Got the check. Is there a big expense I missed?" "Property taxes," he said. "Those were expected. They should have been reserved." He sighed, and I could picture him leaning back in his office chair, rubbing his forehead like I was a vendor asking for payment. "Marcus, if you want to take over managing 4 properties and 2 accounts, be my guest." I'm not criticizing. I'm asking. You always ask like you're auditing somebody. Because we are trustees, David. We're supposed to account. There was a pause. Then he said, "You got 11 grand for doing nothing. Try saying thank you." I did not have a response ready for that. It landed too close to something old. David had always believed proximity to work was the same as ownership. If he drove to the bank, the money became more his. If he spoke to the tenant, the rent became more his. If he found Dad in the chair, grief became more his. I said, "Send me the statements, that's all." "When I have time." "When will that be?" "When I have time, Marcus. I'm not your employee." He hung up while the gym doors opened and 12 boys poured into the parking lot carrying water bottles and shouting over each other. My son waved at me from the curb. I waved back and put the phone face down on the passenger seat. That was the first time I felt something other than grief around the trust. Not suspicion yet. More like the feeling you get when a door you thought was locked shifts a little in its frame. 2 months later, Lena called me. She lived 40 minutes away, worked part-time at a dental office, and had 2 kids younger than mine. Her husband, Rob, was a firefighter. They were not broke, but every month had a shape, and every unexpected bill dented it. She tried to make her voice light when she asked, "Did your distribution seem lower?" "Yeah," I said. "I asked David for statements." "Did he send them?" "No." She got quiet. "What?" I asked. I asked too. He told me he didn't have to explain every dollar to me. I sat up straighter. "He said that?" He said, "Lena, you married a guy with a pension. You'll be fine." There it was. Not just defensiveness, contempt. David had categories in his head, and once he put you in one, he treated you like the label was a legal document. Lena was emotional. Jonah was young. I was picky. David was in charge. I asked her to forward me the messages. She hesitated. Marcus, I don't want to start a war. That sentence became the refrain of the next year. Lena said it. Jonah said it. Aaron said it once, very softly, while watching me stare at trust documents at midnight. Nobody wanted a war. The problem was that David had already started one. He had just convinced everyone that noticing was the aggressive act. Jonah took the longest to bring in. He was 30, 6 years younger than Lena, and had spent his whole life trying not to need anything from anyone. He worked for the county road department, coached his daughter's soccer team, and still apologized before asking questions. When I called him and asked if David had sent him any trust statements, he said, "I figured you and Dave had all that." "We should," I said. "I don't." "Is something wrong?" I looked at the spreadsheet on my screen. I had started entering what I knew: estimated rent, known property taxes, insurance premiums from old files, bank balances from the date of death inventory, distribution checks. The missing columns bothered me like missing teeth. "I don't know yet," I said. "That's the problem." The next distribution was supposed to arrive in September. It did not. No email, no letter, no explanation. On September 16th, David sent a group text at 7:12 in the morning. "Distribution delayed due to administration and liquidity issues. Will update." I called him immediately. He did not answer. I texted, "What liquidity issues? We have rental income and brokerage assets." He did not answer that either. At 10:30, Lena wrote privately, "Rob's truck needs transmission work." I was counting on at least some of it. At 11:05, Jonah wrote, "Did I miss something? What does liquidity mean here?" At noon, David finally replied to the group, "Please stop panicking. Trust administration takes time." I called again. This time he answered, but not with hello. "I'm in a meeting," he said. "Then step out." "Excuse me?" "Step out, David. You just told 4 beneficiaries there's no distribution because of liquidity issues. What issues?" I heard a door close. His voice dropped. "You need to watch your tone. You need to answer the question. There are expenses, there are repairs, there are trustee fees, there are things you don't understand because you're not the one doing the work. I'm co-trustee." He laughed once. Not loudly. Worse. Like I had said something cute. On paper. My hand tightened around the phone. I remember that because my knuckles brushed the edge of my desk and hurt. What does that mean? It means Dad named you because Mom wanted everyone to feel included. He knew who would actually handle it. There are sentences that do not sound important until later. That one did. My father had never said that. My mother had never said that. But David said it with the confidence of a man who had been using dead people as witnesses because they could not object. "Send the accounting," I said. "I'll send a summary." "No, a full accounting. Bank statements, investment statements, income, expenses, trustee compensation, distributions, transfers, all of it." "You Googled a phrase and now you're a lawyer?" "No, I'm a beneficiary and a co-trustee." His voice went flat. "You want to spend your inheritance on lawyers? Keep pushing. I can keep this trust in administration for years. You have no idea how slow this can get." Then came the line that ended the old version of my relationship with him. "I'm in charge," he said. "You'll get what's left." I did not yell. I did not threaten. I did not say anything dramatic. I just sat there, listening to the faint hum of my office air conditioner, and something inside me went very still. "Put that in writing," I said. He hung up. He did not put it in writing, but the damage was done. Not because I could prove that exact sentence, because the sentence told me how he saw the trust, not as a duty, not as a shared responsibility, as a wallet he had been handed first. That night, I pulled out the trust binder. It was a thick black binder with my mother's handwriting on a sticky note inside the front cover. Marcus copy, it said, underlined twice. I sat at the dining room table after the kids went to bed and read the sections I had skimmed 2 years earlier. Duty to inform. Duty of loyalty. Duty to avoid self-dealing. Trustee compensation reasonable in relation to services performed. Beneficiaries entitled to reports. Co-trustees to act jointly unless impracticable. My mother had highlighted one paragraph in yellow. I do not know if she understood its legal meaning or if she just liked that it sounded fair. A trustee shall keep the qualified beneficiaries reasonably informed about administration of the trust and of the material facts necessary for them to protect their interests. Necessary for them to protect their interests. I read that phrase 3 times. Erin came downstairs in her robe and found me with papers spread across the table. Is it bad? She asked. I don't know. That means yes. I leaned back and rubbed my face. It means if he had a clean explanation, he would have given it. She sat across from me. What are you going to do? I looked at my mother's sticky note. Marcus copy. Like she had known I would need a map. Ask correctly, I said. The next morning, I wrote David a formal email. Not a text, not a call. An email with the trust name in the subject line. I kept it calm. I stated that as a beneficiary and named co-trustee, I was requesting a full accounting from the date of my father's death to the present. I listed categories: all bank statements, brokerage statements, rent rolls, leases, invoices, repair records, trustee fee calculations, loan documents, transfers, checks, electronic payments, and any transactions involving David, his business, or entities he controlled. I asked for it within 30 days. Before I sent it, I forwarded a draft to Lena and Jonah. Lena called within 5 minutes. This sounds serious, she said. It is serious. What if he gets mad? He already threatened to bury the trust for years. But what if this makes it worse? I wanted to tell her that was exactly how people like David kept power. They made the consequence of asking seem worse than the consequence of being robbed. But Lena was not weak. She was scared and she was grieving, and David had been training all of us for years to hear his irritation as authority. So I said, "You don't have to send anything. I just want you to know what I'm doing." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Add my name." That surprised me. "Are you sure?" "No," she said, "but add it anyway." Jonah responded an hour later. "I'm okay being included. I don't understand all this, but I trust you." I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. I trust you. It made the next part heavier. Because trust is not a compliment when family money is involved. It is a burden. It means if you are wrong, you hurt people who are already hurt. We sent the demand at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday. I remember the time because I took a screenshot of the sent email. David replied at 5:03. Received. I will respond in due course. No hello, no sign-off. Lawyer words from a man who had mocked me for sounding like one. For the next 30 days, nothing happened on the surface. Underneath, everything changed. David stopped using the sibling group chat except to send pictures of his kids. He called Jonah directly twice, both times to ask why he was letting me turn this into a lawsuit. He told Lena that Rob should talk sense into her because women get emotional about estate stuff. When she told me that, her voice was so tight I barely recognized it. "I hate him for making me feel stupid," she said. "You're not stupid." "I know. But he talks. And suddenly I'm 12 again, asking if I can come with you guys and being told I'm too little." That was David's real power. It was not the bank login or the trust binder or the title of trustee. It was memory. He knew exactly which old buttons still worked because he had installed some of them. On day 29, a large envelope arrived at my house. No return letter. Just a stack of papers clipped together badly. The top page said, Trust Summary. Not accounting. Summary. It had broad categories, rounded numbers, and no statements attached. Rental income, $126,000. Expenses, $91,400. Trustee/admin fees, $48,000. Distributions, $44,800. Reserve, $19,300. If you are doing the math, yes, the categories did not make sense together. They did not have to. David was counting on the fact that most people see columns and assume the columns came from somewhere. I spread the pages across the table and started marking them. No dates, no payees, no beginning balance, no ending balance, no asset values, no supporting invoices. Trustee fees listed as a round number, exactly $48,000, with no hourly log and no calculation. A line called short-term liquidity support for $72,500 with no explanation. A line called property stabilization for $38,000. A line called consulting and admin for $26,200. Then I saw the initials EFG beside 3 entries. Ellis Facilities Group, David's company. The amount beside those initials was $72,500. I sat back slowly. My first feeling was not anger, it was embarrassment. Not because I had done anything wrong, because part of me had still been hoping for a messy but innocent explanation, a roof, a tax bill, a tenant who stopped paying, something annoying but clean. Instead, David had sent me a summary that appeared to say the trust had moved $72,500 to his own business and called it liquidity support, as if changing the label changed the act. I called him. He did not answer. I emailed, David, what is the $72,500 liquidity support to EFG? Attach promissory note, trustee authorization, repayment schedule, conflict disclosure, and proof of repayment. His reply came 20 minutes later. Do not contact me in this tone again. EFG performed services and bridged expenses for trust properties. This is why partial information confuses non-operators. Non-operators. I read it out loud to Aaron because it sounded like something he had paid a business coach to say. What does that even mean? She asked. It means he thinks if he uses enough fog, we'll stop asking where the money went. That night, I called Mr. Hargrove's office. He had retired, but the firm still had the file. The receptionist transferred me to an attorney named Allison Park. She had a voice like she had heard every family lie and had started alphabetizing them. I explained the basics. Parents' trust, 4 beneficiaries, older brother trustee, shrinking distributions, no accounting, summary with money going to his business, threats to keep the trust in administration. She did not gasp. She did not say, "That is unbelievable." She said, "How much documentation do you have?" That was when I knew she had seen this before. Trust document, emails, texts, distribution checks, his summary, I said. Any bank statements? No, he won't provide them. Any evidence he paid himself fees? Only the summary, $48,000. She was quiet for a moment. I heard typing. Mr. Ellis, I can't advise you fully until I review the trust, but I can tell you generally how this usually works. Beneficiaries have rights. Trustees have duties. A trustee who controls the information can make things look more complicated than they are. The first step is a formal demand. It sounds like you did that. The next step, if the response is deficient, is a petition to compel accounting. possibly removal, and possibly surcharge if the records show misappropriation or self-dealing. Surcharge was a word I knew only as an extra fee on concert tickets. Surcharge means what? I asked. If a trustee breaches fiduciary duty and causes loss to the trust, the court can order that trustee personally liable to restore the money. Fees, improper loans, interest, sometimes attorney fees depending on the circumstances. Personally liable. I wrote that down. Would the court really remove him? I asked. If the facts support it, yes. Courts remove trustees for self-dealing, failure to account, hostility that impairs administration, misuse of assets, commingling. The details matter. But a trustee does not get to say, "I'm in charge, you'll get what's left." That is almost the opposite of the job. I had not told her that exact line. I had said he threatened to keep the trust in administration. I had said he controlled the books. I had not quoted him, so when she said it, my throat tightened. That's basically what he said, I told her. They usually do, she said. We scheduled a consultation. Her retainer made me swallow hard. I told Erin the number, and she went quiet long enough that I knew she was doing our own household math. We can use part of savings, she said. I hate that. I know. If I'm wrong, I've spent our money attacking my brother. And if you're right? I looked at the trust summary again. EFG, $72,500. Trustee/admin fees, $48,000. Then he spent everyone's money first. The consultation happened on a rainy Monday at Allison Park's office downtown. The building had marble floors and elevators that made me feel underdressed in a sport coat I wore twice a year. Lena came with me. Jonah wanted to but had a work shift he could not trade. Lena wore black pants, a gray sweater, and the necklace my mother had left her. She kept touching it while we waited. Allison was in her late 40s, with short dark hair and a yellow legal pad already half full by the time we sat down. She did not waste time. "I'm going to say some things plainly," she said. "That doesn't mean I'm accusing anyone yet. It means we need to separate emotion from proof. Your brother may have legitimate expenses. He may be bad at paperwork. He may also be using trust assets for himself. We don't know until we get records. What we do know is that the document he sent is not a full accounting." She walked us through what a real trust accounting should include: beginning assets, receipts, disbursements, gains and losses, trustee compensation, distributions, ending assets, supporting records, clear separation between trust funds and personal or business funds. She used a pen to point to David's summary. "This is a story about numbers," she said, "not numbers." Lena let out a small laugh even though nothing was funny. Allison looked at her. "Mrs. Alvarez, what are you most afraid will happen if you challenge him?" Lena blinked. "He'll never speak to us again." Allison nodded. "That may happen. What else?" "He'll drag it out. He said he could." "He can try. But court supervision exists because trustees sometimes confuse delay with authority. A judge can order deadlines. A judge can appoint a neutral fiduciary. A judge can freeze certain actions. Again, facts matter. But you are not helpless because he has the checkbook." Lena's eyes filled. She looked down quickly, embarrassed. Allison pretended not to notice, which I appreciated. "I don't want his life ruined," Lena said. "Removal as trustee is not ruin," Allison said. "Repaying money that was not his is not ruin. Those are remedies. If his choices created personal consequences beyond that, that is not you doing it to him. That is the math catching up." The math catching up. I wrote that down too. Allison's first recommendation was another formal demand, this time from her office, citing the trust terms and the relevant duties. It would give David a short deadline to provide a complete accounting and records. If he failed or produced more fog, we would petition the probate court to compel accounting and seek temporary orders limiting his control. We were not starting with removal because judges like steps. Give the trustee a chance. Let him refuse. Then show the refusal. That made sense to me. It also made me nervous. Steps meant time. Time meant David still controlled the accounts. Allison must have seen it on my face. We can request bank records through discovery once a petition is filed. We can also ask for expedited relief if there is evidence assets are at risk, but don't skip the clean demand. A careful record helps you later. Careful record. That was my language. David thought my spreadsheets were a personality flaw. Allison treated them like a weapon if used correctly. The letter went out on Allison's letterhead 2 days later. It was polite in the way legal letters are polite when they are carrying a hammer in a briefcase. It requested full accounting and records by a date certain. It demanded explanation for payments to Ellis Facilities Group. It asked for documentation supporting trustee fees. It reminded him of fiduciary duties of loyalty, impartiality, and prudence. It warned that failure to comply could result in court action seeking removal, surcharge, and appointment of a neutral fiduciary. David called me 11 minutes after the email copy hit his inbox. "You hired a lawyer," he said. "Yes, against your own brother. For the trust. Don't do that. Don't use that calm voice like you're the reasonable one." I was standing in my garage because the kids were inside. Rain ticked against the open door. A cardboard box of my father's tools sat on a shelf where I had put it after the funeral and never opened. I stared at the label in his handwriting, copper fittings. "Send the accounting," I said. "You have no idea what you've done." "Then explain it in documents." He made a sound like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You think Allison Park scares me? I've dealt with attorneys." "Good. Then this shouldn't be hard." His voice sharpened. "Listen carefully. If this goes to court, the trust pays lawyers before anyone gets distributions. Every dollar you make me spend is a dollar Lena doesn't get, Jonah doesn't get, your kids don't get. You want that on you?" There it was again. The threat dressed up as concern. I almost took the bait. I almost said, "You are the one who did this." But Allison had warned me. "Don't argue with him once counsel is involved," she had said. "People like your brother use arguments to create mud. Short answers. Document everything." So I said, "Communicate through counsel," and ended the call. My hands shook afterward. That surprised me. I had sounded steady, but my body had not gotten the message. I stood in the garage for 10 minutes, breathing in cold air and dust, listening to my family move around inside the house like a life I was trying not to contaminate. David's response to the demand arrived on the last day, not before. The last day at 4:58 p.m. It came from an attorney named Brent Caswell, whose website showed him leaning against a glass conference table with his arms crossed. His letter denied wrongdoing, accused me of harassment, claimed the trust administration was complex, and stated that David had advanced personal and business resources to maintain trust assets during a difficult transition. It included another packet of documents. This packet was bigger. It was not better. There were invoices from Ellis Facilities Group to the trust. They looked professional at first glance. Logo, invoice numbers, line items, emergency property coordination, tenant retention services, capital planning, administrative oversight. The amounts were round and large: $8,500, $12,000, $15,000. Several had the same description copied exactly, including the same typo in maintenance. There were checks from the trust account payable to EFG. There were trustee fee entries with no time records. There was a one-page loan acknowledgement stating that the trust had extended temporary working capital to EFG to preserve vendor relationships beneficial to trust assets. It was signed by David as trustee and David as president of EFG. I remember Allison looking at that page for a long time. "He signed both sides," Lena said. Allison nodded slowly. "Yes, he did." "Is that bad?" Jonah asked. He had come this time, wearing his county work shirt because he had left straight from a job site. Allison took off her glasses. It is rarely a good fact when a fiduciary loans trust money to his own company and signs for both lender and borrower without independent approval, disclosure, or consent. There are exceptions in some settings. This does not look like one. Jonah leaned back. So he really did it. No one answered immediately. The room seemed to settle around the sentence. Lena pressed her fingers to her eyes. "I kept hoping Marcus was overreacting." "I was hoping that too," I said. And I had been. Even after the first summary. Even after EFG. Even after the threat. There is a stubborn, stupid little room in your heart where you keep the version of your sibling who taught you to ride a bike, or bought you beer before you were old enough, or carried you upstairs when you fell asleep during a movie. David had done all of those things. That was the part nobody tells you about family betrayal. You do not just lose money, you lose the right to remember cleanly. Allison filed the petition in November. Petition to compel trustee accounting, suspend or remove trustee, appoint neutral fiduciary, and surcharge for breaches of fiduciary duty. The caption had my family's name in it, which made my stomach turn. Ellis Family Trust, in Re. It looked like something that belonged to strangers. The petition laid out the timeline. Parents created trust, deaths, David's control of accounts, distribution shrinking, requests for accounting, deficient summaries, payments to his company, trustee fees, loan acknowledgement, threats of delay. It included exhibits, our demand, his summary, invoices, the loan page, texts where he told Lena I was trying to make her spend her inheritance on lawyers, and the group text delaying distributions due to liquidity issues. When Allison sent me the final draft before filing, I read every line twice. Seeing it organized did something to me. In conversation, it had felt like a storm. On paper, it looked like a pattern. David was served the week before Thanksgiving. He responded by showing up at Lena's house. I was at work when she called. Her voice was low and fast. "He's here." "Who?" "David, in my driveway. Rob's not home." I stood up so quickly my chair rolled backward. "Don't open the door." "I already did." "He's on the porch." In the background, I heard David's voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Put him on speaker, Lena. Let Marcus explain why he's destroying this family." "Lena," I said, "close the door." "Don't tell my wife what to do in her own house," David shouted, which would have been more impressive if Rob had been home to hear him call someone else's wife his. Lena's breathing changed. Then I heard the door close and the deadbolt turn. David pounded once. "This is pathetic." "Call Rob," I said. "Then call Allison. If he doesn't leave, call the police." "I don't want to call police on my brother." "He came to your house to intimidate you because he got served. That was his choice." She started crying then. Not loud. Angry crying. The kind where the tears are almost an inconvenience. David stayed on her porch for 7 minutes. I know because her doorbell camera recorded it. He paced. He pointed at the camera. He said, "You people are going to regret this." He said, "Dad would be disgusted." He said, "Marcus is using you." Then he left a folder wedged between the storm door and the frame before driving away. Inside the folder were copies of old checks my father had written to each of us over the years. $3,000 to Lena when her first son was born early. $5,000 to me when our furnace died in January. $2,500 to Jonah for a used car down payment. David had highlighted them in yellow and written across the top page, "Since everyone wants to account for family money." That was the first time Jonah got truly angry. He called the group chat. No text, just hit call. So all of us were on at once. David did not answer. Lena did. I did. Jonah's voice was shaking. "He kept Dad's old checks?" Jonah said. "Looks like copies from Dad's files," I said. "He brought those to Lena's house?" "Yes." "Why? To prove Mom and Dad helped us?" "They helped him every other year. He had Dad co-sign trucks. He had Dad pay payroll once. He had Dad cover that vendor lawsuit. Does he want to account for that too?" Lena said, "Jonah." "No, I'm done. I'm done pretending this is Marcus being difficult. Dave is using Dad like a baseball bat." I had never heard Jonah talk about David that way. The youngest sibling had finally stepped out of the role David assigned him. And what David did not know yet was that his little porch performance, the one meant to scare Lena, became Exhibit 14. Allison loved clean facts. She did not love drama. When we sent her the doorbell video in the folder, she replied with one line. "This is useful." Useful. Not awful. Not cruel. Useful. I began to understand why people hire attorneys. Not because attorneys make you less emotional, but because they give your emotions a file name. The first hearing was in December. It was not the big dramatic courtroom scene people imagine. It was a status hearing in a room with bad acoustics, brown benches, and a judge who looked like she had started her morning disappointed and expected the rest of the day to confirm it. Her name was Judge Marianne Keller. She had silver hair, black reading glasses, and a way of looking over them that made adults remember homework they had not done. David sat across the aisle from us in a navy suit that looked new. He did not look at me. He looked at Lena for half a second, then away. Brent Caswell sat beside him, scrolling on a tablet. Allison had a binder with tabs so precise they made me feel slightly better just by existing. The issue that day was our request for a formal accounting and temporary restrictions on major trust transactions. Allison argued that David had failed to provide a proper accounting despite demand, had engaged in transactions with his own company, and had made threats that suggested hostility toward beneficiaries. Brent argued that David had been managing a complex trust under difficult circumstances, that my complaints were fueled by sibling rivalry, and that removing or restricting him would disrupt administration. Judge Keller listened without much expression. Then she asked Brent, "Has your client prepared a statutory accounting?" Brent said, "Your Honor, he has provided substantial financial summaries and supporting documents." The judge repeated, "Has he prepared a statutory accounting?" Brent hesitated. "Not in the formal format, no." The judge turned a page. "Why not?" Brent began talking about transition periods and document collection. Judge Keller let him go for about 30 seconds, then raised one hand. "Counsel, the settlers died more than a year ago. The beneficiaries requested information. There are payments to an entity controlled by the trustee. I am ordering a full accounting within 45 days. I am also ordering that no loans, transfers to related entities, extraordinary fees, or distributions outside ordinary expenses occur without written agreement of all beneficiaries or further court order." David leaned toward Brent and whispered something. Brent put a hand slightly out, the universal lawyer gesture for "please stop moving." Judge Keller saw it. "Mr. Ellis," she said. David looked up. "You are trustee until I say otherwise. That means you are under duties, not above questions. Do you understand?" David's jaw moved once. "Yes, Your Honor." It was the first small consequence. Not removal, not repayment. Just a judge telling him, in public, that the title he had been using like armor was actually a leash. Outside the courtroom, David waited near the elevators. Lena tried to walk past him. He stepped in front of her. "You happy?" he said. Allison immediately moved between them. She was not tall, but she had the energy of a locked door. "Mr. Ellis, do not address my clients directly about pending litigation." He looked over her head at me. "You got what you wanted, Marcus. You got your show?" I said nothing. That was harder than it sounds. "Say something," he snapped. Allison said, "We're done here." David smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. 45 days. Enjoy your paperwork." He thought paperwork was punishment. He still did not understand that paperwork was the only place he could not charm, threaten, or interrupt anyone. The court-ordered accounting arrived late. 45 days came and went. Brent requested an extension. Allison objected. Judge Keller granted 10 days and wrote, in the order, "No further extensions absent extraordinary cause." David used all 10. When the accounting finally arrived, it came in a banker box delivered to Allison's office and a PDF with 612 pages. I took a day off work to review it with her paralegal Nia, who had the calm patience of someone who could find a missing comma in a thunderstorm. We sat in a small conference room with coffee, sticky notes, and a scanner humming in the hallway. At first, the accounting looked more legitimate than the summaries. Beginning balances, receipts, disbursements, asset schedules, fee schedule. But the more we read, the worse it got. The formal format did not clean the transactions. It just gave them names. Trustee fees, $64,800 over 14 months. No contemporaneous time records, just estimates prepared after the fact. Payments to Ellis Facilities Group, $119,750. Categories included property maintenance, emergency coordination, administrative consulting, vendor management, and one invoice for strategic asset preservation that made Nia pause, look at me, and say, "That sounds like a LinkedIn post." Loan to Ellis Facilities Group, $86,000 principal. Interest rate, none listed. Security, none listed. Beneficiary approval, none. Repayments, $7,500. Purpose, working capital to support vendor continuity. There were also reimbursements to David personally, mileage, meals, office supplies, a laptop, a phone plan, a storage unit. Some might have been legitimate. Some looked ridiculous. $312 dinner at a steakhouse listed as tenant relations. $1,850 for executive desk and chair, listed under trust administration equipment. $4,200 payment to a marketing consultant whose invoice mentioned Ellis Facilities Group but had been paid from the trust account. I felt heat rising in my face as I read. Nia must have noticed. "Take breaks," she said. "These reviews are marathons." "How do people do this to family?" She looked at the page, not at me. "They usually decide it was already owed to them before they take it." That sentence stayed with me. David had not woken up one morning and thought, "I will steal from my siblings." He had likely told himself he had done more. He had found Dad. He had handled tenants. He had taken calls. His business had helped. He had earned it. Then he wrote invoices to match the story. Allison's next move was discovery. Subpoenas to the trust bank, the brokerage firm, the property manager my father had used for one duplex, vendors listed in the accounting, and bank records for Ellis Facilities Group limited to transactions involving trust funds. Brent fought the subpoenas. He claimed privacy, burden, harassment, and fishing expedition. Allison filed a motion to compel. Judge Keller granted most of it and narrowed a few requests. David was ordered to produce related bank records and communications. That was when the story changed from suspicious accounting to evidence. The bank records showed the trust account had transferred $86,000 to EFG in 3 installments: $25,000 in April, $35,000 in June, $26,000 in August. The memo lines said vendor bridge, operations bridge, and temporary capital. Within 48 hours of each transfer, EFG used the money for payroll, a delinquent equipment lease, credit card payments, and one payment to a business lender that had sent a default notice 2 weeks earlier. Not trust property expenses, David's business expenses. The trustee fee records were no better. He had paid himself monthly, usually $4,500 or $5,000, even in months with little activity. He claimed hours for tasks that vendors had also billed for. He paid himself for reviewing rent deposits at 2 hours per deposit. He paid himself for calls with me where he had refused to answer questions. My favorite, if you can call it that, was a 1.5-hour entry for beneficiary communication management on the date he told Lena her firefighter husband had a pension, so she would be fine. Allison circled that one and said, "Judges are human. This will annoy her." The subpoenaed vendor records exposed another layer. Several EFG invoices to the trust charged for work performed by outside vendors at lower amounts. A plumber charged $680 for a water heater repair. EFG invoiced the trust $2,400 for emergency plumbing coordination. A landscaping company charged $1,150 for cleanup after a storm. EFG invoiced $3,800 for property stabilization. David had put his company between the trust and the real vendors, then marked up work his company had not actually done. It was not clever. That was what bothered me. Some betrayals are complex. This one was arrogant. He had assumed nobody would look past the first page. Around this time, David started trying to settle in the family way. Not through lawyers, through pressure. He called Jonah at 6:30 one morning while Jonah was packing his daughter's lunch. "You're letting Marcus spend your kid's college money," David said. Jonah put him on speaker and recorded the call, which was legal in our state because Jonah was a party to the conversation. He had learned to do that from Allison. "I want the accounting finished," Jonah said. "You don't even know what that means." "I know the trust loaned your company money." "My company kept Dad's properties running." "Did the trust pay your equipment lease?" David went silent for just long enough. "That's out of context," he said, then put the context in court. I was proud of Jonah for that line. He sounded terrified when he told me about it later, but fear did not make the line less good. David tried Lena, too. He sent her a long email with the subject "Mom." That alone was cruel. In it, he wrote that Mom had always wanted us to stay together, that Marcus was poisoning the family, that lawyers would take everything, and that if Lena withdrew from the petition, he would make sure her next distribution was prioritized because he knew her family had needs. Lena forwarded it to Allison and wrote, "Is this what you meant by useful?" Allison replied, "Yes, very." That email became part of our supplemental filing, not because it was the largest wrong, but because it showed how David thought. He still believed distributions were favors he could aim at obedient people. He still did not understand that equal beneficiaries do not get paid based on loyalty points. The lowest point came in March, almost exactly 2 years after Dad died. By then, the case had consumed our family calendar. Every holiday had a shadow. Every sibling conversation had legal weather in it. Aaron and I had spent more on attorney fees than we had ever spent on anything that did not have wheels or a roof. Lena was exhausted. Jonah was angry in a way that made him quiet, which worried me more than yelling would have. Then Brent produced what he called a reconciliation packet. It was 148 pages of confusion, spreadsheets with revised categories, Notes saying certain EFG payments should be reclassified as trustee advances. A new promissory note backdated to the month of the first loan. A memo claiming all beneficiaries had been orally informed that EFG might support trust operations. A schedule showing that if litigation continued for another year, projected legal fees could reduce available distributions by 30 to 40%. Brent included a settlement offer. David would reduce his claimed trustee fees by $10,000, agree to a repayment schedule from EFG over 7 years, and remain trustee with a professional bookkeeper assisting. In exchange, we would dismiss the removal and surcharge claims and release him from liability. Lena read the offer and said, "7 years?" Jonah said, "Dad's trust becomes Dave's payment plan." I said nothing because I was staring at the projected legal fees page. It was designed well. I have to admit that. The numbers were big, scary, and arranged to make our case look like the threat. Continue litigation. Everyone loses. Settle. Family heals. It even had a line labeled beneficiary net recovery risk. That phrase did what David's yelling had not. It got into my head. That night, I barely slept. I came downstairs at 2:20 in the morning and opened the refrigerator for no reason. Erin found me standing there in the light. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "Trying to solve fear with cold air." I closed the refrigerator. She leaned against the counter. "Talk." I told her I was afraid Brent was right, that we would spend too much. That even if David had done wrong, the lawyers would eat the remedy. That Lena would blame me later. That Jonah would regret trusting me. That my kids would remember me as the dad who spent a year angry at his brother. Erin listened. Then she said, "What would happen if you stopped?" "David stays trustee." "And?" "He repays over 7 years, maybe." "And?" "He controls records." "And?" I rubbed my eyes. "He learns that if he makes the process expensive enough, he can keep what he took." She nodded. There it is. I hated how clear it sounded when she made me say it. The next day, Allison held a meeting with all 3 of us. She did not push. That was important. She put the settlement offer on the table and walked through it piece by piece. "This is not nothing," she said. "Settlement has value. Certainty has value. Litigation is expensive. A judge is never guaranteed. I need you to understand that." Then she turned to the backdated promissory note. "But this document creates problems for him. The original production had a loan acknowledgement with no terms. Now, after subpoenas, he has produced a more complete note dated earlier. We will ask when it was created. We will ask for metadata. We will ask why it was not in the first court-ordered accounting. We will ask why no interest was charged. We will ask why no security was taken. We will ask why a prudent trustee would lend money to an insolvent company he owned when beneficiaries were being told distributions were delayed due to liquidity issues." She looked at each of us. "I cannot promise an outcome. I can tell you the evidence is stronger today than it was when we filed." Lena folded her hands. "I don't want to settle if he stays in charge." Jonah said, "Me neither." They both looked at me. For months, I had felt like I was pulling them forward. In that moment, they pulled me. "Okay," I said, "then we don't." What David did not know was that the reconciliation packet, meant to scare us into stopping, had given Allison the exact opening she wanted: metadata, backdating, new classifications, changed explanations. Each revision made the story less like messy administration and more like a man moving labels after the bank records cornered him. The deposition happened in April. I did not attend because Allison thought it would make David perform more. She later played us portions of the recording in her office. Watching your brother answer questions under oath is a strange experience. It is like seeing someone try to dance on ice while insisting the floor is carpet. Allison's voice on the recording was calm. Mr. Ellis, did the trust lend $86,000 to Ellis Facilities Group? David shifted in his chair. Funds were advanced for operational continuity. Was that a loan? In a broad sense. Did the trust receive interest? Not yet. Was interest required? We were going to address terms once cash flow normalized. Who is we? Me primarily. You as trustee, or you as president of EFG? He looked at Brent. Brent said, "Answer if you understand." David said, "Both roles were involved." Allison let the silence sit. Then she asked, "Did any beneficiary consent to the loans before the money was transferred?" They were aware the trust required active management. That is not my question. Did any beneficiary consent to loans from the trust to your company? No formal consent, no. Did Marcus Ellis consent? No. Did Lena Alvarez consent? No. Did Jonah Ellis consent? No. Did you disclose to them, before transferring the funds, that your company was in default on an equipment lease? David's face changed. Just slightly. The confidence did not leave. It flickered. I don't recall the timing of that notice. Allison slid a document across the table. This is a default notice dated June 3rd. The trust transferred $35,000 to EFG on June 11th. EFG paid the equipment lender on June 12th. Does that refresh your recollection? David read. His mouth tightened. We had multiple obligations, he said, including obligations unrelated to the trust, correct? EFG's stability benefited the trust. That is your position? Yes. Your position is that using trust money to stabilize your private company benefited the trust? Brent objected to form. David answered anyway. Somebody had to keep things moving. That line became Allison's favorite. Somebody had to keep things moving. She wrote it on a yellow sticky note and put it on the inside of the hearing binder. Not because she would quote it dramatically, but because it captured the entitlement perfectly. David did not say he had authority. He did not say it was prudent. He said somebody had to. And the somebody, naturally, was him. The more records came in, the more obvious the pattern became. David used the trust account like a cushion. When EFG was short, the trust got an invoice or a loan. When he needed to justify his time, the trust got a trustee fee. When beneficiaries asked questions, the trust suddenly became too complex for distributions. He was not looting it all at once. He was bleeding it while calling the blood administration. There was one email that changed how I felt about the case. It came from David to his operations manager at EFG, sent 2 days after our first informal request for statements. The subject line was, "Trust cash." Dick. The body said, "Need to keep these buckets cleaner. Marcus is sniffing around and he loves spreadsheets. Route anything property-related through EFG invoices so we're not having 50 conversations. I'll true up later." Marcus is sniffing around. I read that line in Allison's office and felt something colder than anger. He knew. He knew before the formal demand. He knew the buckets were not clean. He knew the invoices were a way to avoid conversations. And he knew me well enough to know I would follow the numbers if I got close. Lena read it and whispered, "He made fun of you for the thing that caught him." Jonah said, "Dad would have lost his mind." Maybe he would have. Maybe he would have blamed himself. Maybe my mother would have sat David down at the kitchen table and used that quiet voice that made all of us feel 6 years old. I do not know. The dead are easy to recruit because they cannot correct you. That was why I tried not to speak for them. But I did know one thing. They did not build that trust so David could pay his equipment lender and call the rest of us impatient. The evidentiary hearing was set for June. By then, the neutral fiduciary we had proposed was a retired trust officer named Karen Whitcomb. She had managed private trusts for 30 years and had the most soothingly boring resume I had ever read. That was exactly what we wanted. Boring. Neutral. Someone who would look at a water heater invoice and see a water heater invoice, not a chance to rescue a failing business. The week before the hearing, David made one last attempt to split us. He sent me a text from a new number because I had blocked his personal one after he would not stop sending articles about estate litigation destroying families. Meet me alone. No lawyers. Dad would want us to fix this man to man. I forwarded it to Allison. She replied, no. That was the whole email. No period even. Just, no. Lena got a different message. You can still step back from Marcus's petition. I know Rob doesn't want this. Jonah got, when this is over, don't come asking me for help. None of us answered. That silence bothered him more than any argument would have. David understood conflict. He did not understand being denied an audience. The hearing started on a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. I arrived at 8:15 because my anxiety liked punctuality. The courthouse lobby smelled like floor polish and wet umbrellas even though it had not rained. Lena and Rob arrived together. Jonah came in wearing a button-down shirt his wife had clearly ironed. Allison met us near the elevators with Naya carrying 2 binders and a canvas bag full of exhibits. Remember, Allison said, answer only what's asked. Don't argue, don't react to him. The judge is watching everything. I feel like I'm going to throw up, Lena said. That is normal, Allison said. Try not to do it on Exhibit 22. Lena laughed. It broke the tension just enough. David arrived with Brent at 8:52. He looked thinner than he had in December. His suit was the same navy one. He had a leather folder under his arm and the expression of someone who believed the room was still negotiable if he could just get the right person alone. He glanced at us once, then looked away. His wife, Claire, was not with him. That surprised me. Claire had been mostly absent from the whole process. I did not know what David had told her. Later, I learned he had told her the trust owed him money. Judge Keller took the bench at 9:04. No drama, no music. Just everyone standing, then sitting, and the court reporter adjusting her machine. Allison's opening was simple. David had failed to provide timely and complete information. He had paid himself excessive trustee fees without records. He had loaned trust funds to his own financially distressed company without consent, interest, security, or independent approval. He had used EFG invoices to mark up or disguise expenses. His hostility toward beneficiaries impaired administration. The remedies requested were removal, appointment of Karen Whitcomb as neutral fiduciary, surcharge for improper loans and excess fees with interest, and an order requiring turnover of all records. Brent's opening tried to make David sound overwhelmed but devoted. He said David stepped up after his father's death, handled difficult properties, preserved assets during a chaotic period, and made judgment calls in good faith. He said any bookkeeping issues could be corrected without the extreme remedy of removal. He said family litigation had escalated because Marcus was suspicious by nature, and because grief had distorted normal administration. Suspicious by nature. I wrote that on my legal pad because I needed somewhere to put it. Allison called me first. She walked me through the trust, the distributions, the requests, David's responses, the deficient summary, the line about being in charge. Brent objected when I testified to the exact phrase, "You'll get what's left," because it had not been recorded. Judge Keller allowed it for the limited purpose of explaining my subsequent actions, not for proving the truth of anything. Legal distinctions are strange when the sentence is burned into your memory. Brent cross-examined me for 40 minutes. He tried to make me admit I had resented David before the trust. I said we had normal sibling tension. He asked if I had ever managed rental property. I said no. He asked if I understood the time burden David carried. I said I understood trustees can be compensated reasonably for actual work. He asked if I had hired Allison before giving David a chance to explain. I said we requested records first. He asked if I considered that my demands might have made David defensive. I looked at him. A trustee's duty to account does not depend on my tone. Allison looked down at her notes, but I saw the corner of her mouth move. Lena testified next. She talked about asking for statements, David telling her she would be fine because Rob had a pension, the porch incident, the folder of old checks, the email offering to prioritize her distribution if she stepped back. Her voice shook at first. Then Brent made the mistake of suggesting she had been influenced by me because she did not understand trust administration. Lena sat up straighter. I understand when someone uses my mother against me, she said. I understand when a trustee says he'll pay me sooner if I stop asking questions. I understand that perfectly. Judge Keller wrote something down. Jonah testified after lunch. He was nervous and kept folding his hands, then unfolding them. But when Allison played the recorded call where David said the equipment lease was out of context, Jonah's voice steadied. He explained why he recorded it, how David had called early, and how he felt pressured to choose between family loyalty and basic answers. Then came the records. This was where Allison did her real work. Not with speeches, with sequence. She put up a timeline on a screen. April 3rd, EFG receives vendor demand. April 8th, trust transfers $25,000 to EFG. April 9th, EFG pays payroll and credit card. June 3rd, equipment lease default notice. June 11th, trust transfers $35,000 to EFG. June 12th, EFG pays lender. August 18th, David texts group that distribution may be delayed due to administration and liquidity issues. August 20th, trust transfers $26,000 to EFG. August 21st, EFG pays business line of credit. September 16th, David tells beneficiaries distribution delayed due to liquidity issues. Each date landed like a footstep. Brent objected that EFG's stability supported the trust because EFG coordinated property work. Allison responded by showing vendor invoices paid separately and then EFG markups. Plumber invoice, $680. EFG invoice to trust, $2,400. Landscaper invoice, $1,150. EFG invoice, $3,800. Marketing consultant invoice for EFG brand refresh, $4,200 paid by trust. Brent called it administrative overlap. Judge Keller asked, was the brand refresh for the trust? Brent said he would address that with his witness. David was the witness. He took the stand at 3:18 p.m. I remember the time because the courtroom had one of those round clocks above the door, and I stared at it while he raised his right hand. For a second, he looked like our father. Not in his face exactly. In the way his shoulders squared when he did not want to seem nervous. That resemblance hurt more than I expected. Brent questioned him first. David told his version. He stepped in during grief. He handled tenants, repairs, bills, and banking. Marcus second-guessed from the sidelines. EFG had resources and vendor relationships that helped preserve trust property. The loans were temporary. Fees reflected substantial work. He intended to true up everything once administration stabilized. He regretted that communication had broken down, but he had acted in good faith. If you knew nothing else, it might have sounded reasonable. That was David's gift. He could make a bad decision sound like a burden he had nobly accepted. Then Allison stood. She started gently. Too gently, I thought, until I realized what she was doing. She let him agree to principles. Mr. Ellis, a trustee owes a duty of loyalty to the beneficiaries, correct? Yes. A trustee should avoid conflicts of interest, correct? Generally, yes. A trustee should keep trust assets separate from personal assets and business assets, correct? Yes. A trustee should provide accurate information to beneficiaries, correct? Yes. A trustee should not use trust funds for personal benefit unless authorized, correct? Brent objected to the legal conclusion. Judge Keller allowed a narrower question. Allison nodded. You understood. You could not simply treat trust money as your own, correct? David gave a small smile. Of course. There it was again. Of course. Relax. Allison picked up a binder. Let's talk about the April transfer. For the next hour, she walked him through documents. Not fast, not angrily. One record at a time: bank statement, transfer, EFG account, payroll, credit card, vendor demand. David tried to explain each one separately: cash flow timing, operational continuity, vendor relationships, preservation. Allison let him say the words, then placed the next document beside them. Where is the promissory note for the April transfer? The terms were understood. By whom? By me. You in which role? He blinked. Both. Where is the beneficiary consent? There was no formal consent. Where is the interest calculation? It had not been finalized. Where is the security agreement? There wasn't one. Where is the trustee resolution approving a loan to your own company? This is a family trust, not a corporation. Judge Keller looked up at that. Allison did not change tone. So there is no written approval other than documents you signed on both sides? David's jaw tightened. I was authorized to administer the trust. That was not my question. He looked at the judge, then back at Allison. No. The courtroom was quiet except for the court reporter's keys. Allison moved to trustee fees. She showed his $64,800 in compensation. She asked for time records. David said he reconstructed time based on calendars, calls, emails, and the volume of work. She showed entries charging 2 hours to review single rent deposits. He said deposits required oversight. She showed that the bank automatically deposited rent by ACH. He said oversight included confirming receipt. She showed an entry charging 1.5 hours for beneficiary communication management on a date he sent Lena one text. He said there may have been other communications. Do you have records of those other communications? Allison asked. Not with me. Did you produce them? I don't recall. Isn't it true the only communication with Lena Alvarez on that date was your text saying, "You married a guy with a pension. You'll be fine?" Brent objected. Judge Keller allowed the question after Allison showed the exhibit. David read the text on the screen, his face colored. That was taken out of context, he said. What was the context? She was worried. I was reassuring her. Lena made a tiny sound beside me. Rob reached over and took her hand. Allison paused. You charged the trust 1.5 hours for that reassurance? The silence after that was the first time I saw David truly look cornered. He recovered. Sort of. That entry included broader beneficiary issues. But no records. Not here. Not produced. I would have to check. Allison let the answer sit. Then she moved to the email that said Marcus is sniffing around. I had wondered if hearing it in court would make me angry again. It did not. It made me tired. Allison displayed the email. You wrote, "Need to keep these buckets cleaner. Marcus is sniffing around and he loves spreadsheets. Route anything property related through EFG invoices so we're not having 50 conversations. I'll true up later." Did I read that correctly? David shifted. Yes. What buckets needed to be cleaner? Accounting categories. Why did Marcus asking questions require routing things through EFG invoices? That's not what I meant. What did you mean? I meant we needed more organized billing. Organized so beneficiaries would have fewer conversations? so administration would be efficient. By putting EFG between the trust and vendors? When appropriate. Who decided when appropriate? I did. Who benefited from EFG markups? Brent objected. Overruled. David said, EFG charged for coordination. Allison repeated, who benefited financially from EFG markups? David looked at the document. EFG did. And who owns EFG? I do. There was no dramatic gasp. Courtrooms are not like television. The ceiling lights hummed. Someone coughed in the back. The judge made a note. But for me, that small exchange was louder than shouting. Who benefited? EFG? Who owns EFG? I do. The next morning was when the cold open moment finally happened. Judge Keller had asked for specific references to the alleged surcharge amounts. Allison came prepared with a chart. Improper loans, $86,000 principal, minus $7,500 repaid, plus interest calculated at the statutory rate. Excess trustee fees. Allison argued the entire $64,800 should be disgorged or reduced substantially because of disloyalty and lack of records. EFG markups and unsupported invoices, $58,300. Personal reimbursements unrelated or inadequately supported, $9,740. Total requested surcharge before interest and fees, $211,340, with final interest to be calculated. David sat across from me at counsel table. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him, but he was not writing anymore. Allison handed the court a binder tabbed by category. Brent argued the numbers were inflated, that some EFG charges reflected real work, that not every poor record was a breach, and that removal would harm the trust by replacing a family member with a paid fiduciary. Judge Keller asked questions, precise questions, dates, authority, consent, benefit, records. Then she turned to David. Mr. Ellis, I want to understand your view of the trust's purpose. David straightened. To preserve my parents' assets and distribute them according to their wishes. And their wishes were equal benefit among the 4 children? Yes. Where in the trust instrument are you authorized to lend trust funds to a company you own without interest, security, consent, or independent review? David looked at Brent. Brent started to stand, but Judge Keller said, I am asking Mr. Ellis his understanding. David swallowed. I believed my general administrative powers allowed me to make decisions necessary to preserve value. Judge Keller looked down at the chart. The April funds paid EFG payroll and credit card obligations. The June funds paid an equipment lease default. The August funds paid a business line of credit. Explain how those preserved trust value. David's mouth opened, closed. He said, EFG was supporting the properties. If EFG failed, the trust would lose that support. Was EFG the only company capable of coordinating repairs? No, but we had history. Was there a written contract between the trust and EFG approved by all beneficiaries? No. Were bids obtained? No. Was your conflict disclosed before the transfers? They knew I owned EFG. That was not my question. Was the conflict disclosed before the transfers? David's face had gone pale except for 2 spots high on his cheeks. Not formally. Judge Keller picked up the accounting. The room seemed to shrink around the sound of paper moving. The accounting reflects trustee fees of $64,800, she said. It reflects loans to your company of $86,000. It reflects payments and markups to your company of at least $119,750, some portion of which may overlap with invoices. It reflects delayed distributions to beneficiaries while your company received funds. It reflects a later created promissory note after litigation began. It reflects no interest, no security, no approval, and incomplete records. David stared at the table. The judge continued. You testified yesterday that you understood you could not treat trust money as your own. Yet when the beneficiaries asked questions, your response was not transparency. It was resistance. When your siblings sought information, you characterized them as confused, emotional, or, in one email, sniffing around. At that phrase, David's eyes flicked toward me. Not long, just once. That was the moment. Not the order. Not the money. That look. For almost 2 years, he had acted like the rest of us were outside a locked office, knocking too loudly. But in that second, while the judge read his own words in the same flat voice she used for case numbers, he understood that the locked office had windows. He understood that the phrases he used when he thought he controlled the room had followed him into a room he did not control. He understood that, "I'll true up later," did not sound like leadership under fluorescent lights and oath. Judge Keller turned another page. There is also testimony that you told Marcus Ellis, quote, "I'm in charge. You'll get what's left." I understand that statement is disputed and was admitted for a limited purpose, but the documented administration is consistent with that attitude. The trustee treated beneficiary rights as obstacles, not obligations. David's hand moved to his pen. He gripped it, then set it down. For the first time in my life, I saw my older brother have no interruption available. No joke, no insult, no family history, no dad would want, no relax, just a judge, a record, and the math. Judge Keller said, "A family trustee is still a trustee, perhaps especially so. The informality of family does not erase fiduciary duties. It increases the need for care because beneficiaries are more likely to trust, hesitate, and delay protecting themselves." Lena started crying silently. Jonah stared straight ahead. I felt Erin's absence sharply. She could not be there because of the kids, but I wish she could hear that sentence. Beneficiaries are more likely to trust, hesitate, and delay protecting themselves. That was the whole story, in one line. David finally spoke, even though no one had asked him a question. "Your Honor, I was trying to keep my father's properties from falling apart." Judge Keller looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Ellis, your father's properties were not yours to rescue with your siblings' money for your company's benefit. There are sentences that change the temperature of a room. That one did." David looked down. Brent put a hand on his sleeve. Not comforting exactly. Containing. Judge Keller gave her ruling from the bench. David was removed as trustee effective immediately. Karen Whitcomb was appointed neutral fiduciary with authority to take control of trust accounts, records, leases, and property administration. David was ordered to turn over passwords, checkbooks, keys, vendor files, tenant communications, and all trust-related records within 7 days. He was enjoined from acting on behalf of the trust or contacting tenants as trustee. Then, the surcharge. The court found that the loans to EFG were breaches of fiduciary duty and self-dealing. David was personally surcharged $78,500 for unpaid loan principal, plus interest. The court found trustee fees excessive and inadequately supported, and ordered $52,000 returned, allowing only a reduced amount for documented ordinary work before the conflicts escalated. The court found $41,600 in EFG markups and unsupported charges recoverable, subject to final reconciliation by the neutral fiduciary. Personal reimbursements of $6,900 were disallowed. Interest would accrue until paid. Attorney fees would be considered after further briefing, including whether they should be paid from David's share or personally due to bad faith. I had imagined I would feel triumphant. I did not. I felt like I had been holding a heavy object for so long that when someone finally took it, my arms did not know how to be empty. David turned around once as the judge left the bench. His face was not angry anymore. That came later, I'm sure. In that second, he looked stunned in a small, private way, like a man who had opened his own wallet and found someone else's name written inside. He looked at me, then at Lena, then at Jonah. None of us spoke. I thought about saying the callback. I thought about saying, "You'll get what's left." I had imagined it more than once, usually while brushing my teeth or sitting in traffic, those little revenge speeches your brain writes when no one is around to hear them. But in the actual moment, saying it would have made me feel smaller. The judge had already said everything that needed saying. His own records had said the rest. So I just gathered my papers. Outside the courtroom, David stood near the same elevators where he had cornered Lena months earlier. This time, he did not step in front of anyone. Brent spoke quietly to him. David nodded, but he seemed to be listening from far away. When the elevator doors opened, he got in without looking back. The doors closed on him in his navy suit, holding the leather folder like it might still contain an answer. Karen Whitcomb moved fast. That was the first relief. Within 2 weeks, she had control of the trust bank accounts. Within a month, she had replaced EFG with direct vendor relationships and a real property management company for 2 rentals. She sent the first neutral report on a Friday afternoon. It was 11 pages, clear enough that Lena texted, "I understood this without crying." Income, expenses, reserve, pending recovery from David. Recommended distribution timing. Open issues. No fog, no lectures, no phrases like operational continuity. She also found more small messes. Nothing as dramatic as the loans, but enough to confirm the pattern. A trust debit card used for gas near David's office on days with no property visits. Late fees because bills had sat unpaid while EFG got transfers. Tenant security deposits commingled in the wrong account. She corrected what she could and documented the rest. David did not repay immediately. Of course he did not. There were post-hearing motions, payment proposals, and arguments about offsets. But he was no longer paying lawyers with mystery and time. He was paying under orders. Eventually, after Karen threatened collection against his beneficial share and Allison filed for fees, David agreed to a structured repayment secured against his share of future trust distributions and a lien against certain business assets. Part of the surcharge came from his share. Part came from EFG selling 2 trucks and a piece of equipment. Part came from money. Claire, his wife, apparently insisted he move out of a personal investment account after she finally saw the order. I do not know what conversations happened in their house. I only know that Claire sent Lena a text 3 months later that said, "I am sorry for what this did to all of you." Lena showed it to me but did not answer. Some apologies arrived from the person standing closest to the blast, not the person who lit the fuse. The trust stabilized under Karen. The next distribution was not huge because reserves had to be rebuilt and legal costs had to be sorted out. But it came with a report, a schedule, and a plain explanation. My share was $9,840. Lena's was the same. Jonah's was the same. David's share was reduced by the repayment order. The memo line read, "Interim distribution per neutral fiduciary report." It was the least sentimental phrase in the world, and I almost framed it. Lena used part of hers to fix Rob's truck, which had somehow survived on borrowed time and firefighter optimism. Jonah put his into his daughter's college account and sent me a screenshot with the account number blacked out. Aaron and I put ours back into savings because the year had taught us that peace, like plumbing, is only invisible when everything is working. The family did not go back to normal. That is the part people skip. Court can remove a trustee. It cannot restore Thanksgiving. David stopped coming to family events. At first, his absence sat in every room like an extra chair. Then, slowly, it became the shape of things. His kids still saw ours sometimes through Claire. Lena and Jonah got closer. I got better at calling for reasons that had nothing to do with documents. Not perfect. Better. One afternoon, about 6 months after the removal order, Karen invited us to walk through the old warehouse because she was preparing a recommendation about whether to sell it. The tenant had finally retired. The place smelled like dust, pipe sealant, and concrete. My father's old company sign was still bolted near the office door, faded blue letters on white metal. Daniel Ellis Plumbing. Reliable work. Fair price. In the office, someone had left a metal desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a corkboard with a curled safety poster from 2009. I opened the top drawer without thinking and found a stack of blank invoice pads. My father's company name at the top. Lines for labor, materials, tax. Simple, honest. Work done, amount owed. I stood there holding one, and for some reason that was when I cried. Not in court. Not when the judge ruled. In an empty warehouse holding a blank invoice. Because my father had spent his life writing down what things cost, and my brother had spent 2 years trying to hide it. Lena came into the office and saw my face. She did not ask. She just leaned against the desk beside me. "Do you think Mom knew?" she said. "About David?" "About all of us. How this would go." I looked at the invoice pad. "I think she knew enough to make copies." Lena smiled a little. "Marcus copy." "Yeah." We stood there for a minute. Then Jonah called from the warehouse floor. "You guys need to see this." We went out and found him by the old parts shelves. He had discovered a coffee can full of keys, none labeled in any useful way. It was exactly the kind of thing Dad would have considered a system. For the next hour, the 3 of us tested keys in doors, cabinets, padlocks, and one ancient vending machine that had not worked since I was in high school. We laughed more than the task deserved. Karen watched from near the loading bay, patient and neutral, and probably billing in 6-minute increments. I did not even mind. A few weeks later, Karen recommended selling the warehouse. The market was good. The tenant was gone. None of us wanted to manage commercial property forever. David objected through counsel, mostly because objecting had become a reflex, but the court approved the sale. The proceeds went into the trust account. The report was clean. The distribution plan was clear. David's repayment was deducted exactly as ordered. The day the sale closed, Karen emailed the final statement at 3:06 p.m. I opened it at my desk and saw the numbers lined up the way numbers should. Beginning balance, sale proceeds, expenses, reserve, surcharge credit, distribution. Equal shares, except for David's court-ordered reduction. No drama, no speeches. At the bottom of her email, Karen wrote, "Please confirm receipt." I typed, "Received. Thank you." Then I sat there for a while looking at those 2 words. Received. Thank you. It was such a small thing to get a clear answer when you asked a clear question. It should not have taken a lawyer, a subpoena, a deposition, a judge, and a neutral fiduciary. But sometimes the simple thing is what people fight hardest to avoid because simple things leave no room to hide. David and I have spoken once since then. It was at a gas station near the highway, of all places. I was filling Aaron's car. He pulled in 2 pumps over in a truck I did not recognize. Not one of the EFG trucks. A personal one, older than what he used to drive. We saw each other at the same time. For a second, I thought he would leave. Then he walked over. "Marcus," he said. "David." He looked thinner still, tired, not humbled exactly. I do not want to give him credit for a transformation I have not seen. But the Polish was gone. He nodded toward the road. "You doing okay?" It was such a normal question that it almost made me laugh. "Yeah," I said. "You?" He looked away. "Getting there." We stood with the pumps clicking behind us. Then he said, You didn't have to take it that far. There it was. Smaller than before, but still there. The belief that the consequence had been a choice I made, not a door he walked through. I could have argued. I could have listed the loans, the fees, the invoices, the porch, the emails, the judge's order. Instead, I thought about Allison telling me not to create mud. I thought about Judge Keller saying family trustees are still trustees. I thought about my mother's sticky note. You had 30 days to send an accounting, I said. He looked at me then. Really looked. The pump clicked off behind him. For a moment, I saw the understanding again. Not as dramatic as court. No judge. No binders. Just the clean line between the first off-ramp and everything that followed. He had been offered a chance to explain. Then another. Then a formal demand. Then a court order. At every step, he chose fog because fog had always worked for him. He did not apologize. He said, "Take care of yourself," and walked back to his truck. I finished pumping gas and sat in the car for a few minutes before driving home. Not because I was shaken, because I realized I had stopped waiting for him to become the brother I could remember without editing. That was its own kind of distribution, not from the trust, from the truth. If there is a moral, I do not think it is that family and money do not mix. Families mix with money every day. Parents pay tuition. Siblings split bills. Kids inherit houses. Trust is not the problem. The problem is when someone treats trust as silence, when they decide your hesitation is permission, when they confuse being first with being owner. My parents built something over a lifetime. David treated it like his wallet because he thought control was the same as ownership. What stopped him was not revenge in the loud sense. It was a demand letter, an accounting, bank records, a petition, a judge willing to read the math out loud. It was slow. It was expensive. It hurt. But it worked because the thing he counted on most was the thing that finally failed him. He counted on us being too afraid to start a war. In the end, we did not start one. We asked where the money went. He just hated the answer.